the topic for conversation for today. So let's now take a special report of what that will kickstart the conversation.
The ripple effect of the coronavirus is being felt globally as it affects every strata of the society. Global economies worst hit, forcing companies to reduce their workforce, shooting up the unemployment rate, with much stress on the sources of income, including anticipation and anxiety on when the period of restrictions will be over. In Nigeria, the story is the same as the country's gross domestic product contracted in the second quarter of the year. According to figures by the National Bureau of Statistics, Nigeria's GDP declined by 6.10%. This is said to represent a drop of 8.22 percent points when compared to the second quarter of 2019 by 2.12% and 7.97 percent points decline when compared to first quarter of 2020 by 1.87%. The GDP drop is said to be due to the impact of the COVID-19 on oil price, which has continued to crash. In the period under review, growth in the country's economy is seen to be quite slow as most resources are spent on COVID-19 recovery, palliatives to the citizens and injection of economic stimulus packages to businesses in order to cushion the effect of the virus, which is being felt by everyone. Oil sector is one of the worst hit as oil prices crashed below $25 per barrel in the international market. Highest negative growth is being recorded in the transport and storage, accommodation and food services, construction, education, real estate and trade amongst others, with prices and fares high and sometimes becoming unaffordable by many. The fear by some experts is whether Nigeria's economy may enter its worst recession in 4 decades. However, the International Monetary Fund (IMF) had disclosed in its June outlook that the Nigerian economy would witness a deeper contraction of 5.4% as against the 3.4% it projected in April 2020. This is as economic watchers are optimistic that the economy will bounce back on a slow but positive growth by the last quarter of the year. Now, what can be done to save the country from falling into deeper recession, and how can the economy bounce back in the face of COVID-19? These are some of the questions before guests on NTA's Good Morning Nigeria shortly.
Many thanks, Oyeyemi Ajayi. Thank you very much for that background report. Just to indicate that the economy is not in recession yet. Just the numbers coming out for the second quarter of the GDP. As we indicated, our discussants this morning are our regulars on economic and financial matters. Let's welcome Ken Ife, Professor of Economics. Prof, delighted to have you on Good Morning.
Thank you very much.
Also here, Niyi Akinsiju, an investment and financial expert. Niyi, delighted to have you with us this morning.
All right, joining us from our Benin Network Center is Professor Michael Balan, a professor of economics. That's a guest from Benin, yes. Well, we need to re-establish link with Benin. All right, now let's go to Kano. And in Kano, we have Dr. Yushao Ango. Yushao Ango is the Associate Professor of Business Entrepreneurship and Dean, Postgraduate School, Kaduna State University. Sir, it's good to have you this morning on Good Morning Nigeria.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me.
All right, so we'll be going to Benin much later in the course of the program, Kingsley.
All right, gentlemen, delighted to have you one more time. Well, we know what the numbers are coming out from the National Bureau of Statistics that Nigeria's GDP contracted by some 6.1% in the second quarter of this year. From your reading, is this an accurate reflection of Nigeria's own share of the global economic crisis resulting from the coronavirus pandemic? Let's begin with Professor Kanife.
I think it's a fair assessment. I'm a bit surprised about the depth of it. I thought we are all expecting, it beat the imagination of both World Bank, IMF and everybody, you know, but Minister has warned us in March to expect this to come. And I didn't know that it could go as deep as -6. We were looking at 3 to 4. And maybe by the end of the year, it can actually go down to 6, 7. But I'm not disappointed, because many other countries, as you said in your report, are actually between 6 and -12, and getting worse for many of them. What I'm concerned about is the impact across sectors. And we really need to get there, because some sectors are completely decimated. And then we need to do a sector level targeting on this. But there are some that have smiles on their face, and there are change of guards in our economy. For example, ICT has now become a dominant player in the service sector. For the first time, it exceeded retail sector, and then it has also far exceeded oil. So digital economy is going to have to come to the center stage of national development. So that's a very good sign. Agriculture disappoints me, not because it's 1.58, but it's trailing so far behind population growth rate, which is 3.2, urbanization growth rate, which is 4.6. And if the accommodation, if the food sector is recording -30, and then we are not sure whether the food is going to be available, then there is a serious matter. And the swamp, it doesn't help. The flooding doesn't help at all.
All right, thank you for that opening comment. Just to inform you that we've been able to re-establish link with our Benin Network Center, and that's where we have our guests who happens to be a regular, Professor Mike Obadan. Professor Mike Obadan, it's a pleasure to have you join us from Benin this morning. You're welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Kirian. It's my pleasure too to be with you. Good morning, Nigeria.
You may also give us your opening comment, on the report by the MBS concerning Nigeria's GDP in the second quarter of 2020. What are you reading, from that report?
Thank you very much, Kingsley. I heard briefly the preliminary comments of Professor Ken Ife. He is right, and I want to say that the figures that have emerged for Nigeria's GDP are not really unexpected, and the figures are understandable. -6.1% growth rate in second quarter compared to a positive growth in the first quarter. And I say it's understandable because right from the beginning of the second quarter marked the lockdown of economic activities in the country as a result of the coronavirus induced first lockdown. And if you look at the growth pattern of the major advanced economies and the emerging market economies, you will find that majority of them experienced negative growth rates in the second quarter in the double digits, some up to -20%, -30%. And it's only China that seem to have stood out with a positive growth rate of a little over 3%. So the Nigerian situation, we are pleased that the contraction is not deeper than what we have seen. And I say that the contraction is understandable if we understand or appreciate what the gross domestic product represents and its growth rate. Maybe I should, briefly, indicate this to put it in a proper context. If we understand it, then we'll be able to appreciate why there had been contraction. The gross domestic product of a country simply represents the market value of the total goods and services produced in a country, either in a given quarter or in a given year, by the resident factors of production in that country, or in other words, by the factors of production located in that country, whether human resources, capital, entrepreneurship, technology, and all that. And so if economic activities have been locked down in nearly all parts of Nigeria, totally or partially, then the capacity to produce goods and services is necessarily reduced or limited. The quantum of goods and services represented by the gross domestic product is reduced, and so the rate of increase of that output, which we are talking about, which is the growth, is also reduced and then is in negative form. So that's why I said it's understandable, but that it's pleasing that the contraction is not worse than we have seen, and perhaps because government had implemented a number of measures fairly early, particularly the monetary interventions.
All right, Professor Michael Ballon, thank you very much there for your opening salvo. We'll return to you in the course of the conversation. Let's go over now to our Kano Network Center, where we earlier introduced Associate Professor Yushua Ango. Dr. Ango, give us your own reading of what the numbers are coming out from the National Bureau of Statistics with regard to the contraction of Nigeria's economy in the second quarter. And by the way, considering that the economy is still virtually in some areas partial or total lockdown, and we have seen that in July, we've also seen that in August, could the numbers for the second quarter be a foretaste of perhaps even more bad news?
Yes, I have listened to the submissions of my senior colleagues, and basically I agree with them that what we have at 6.1% negative is not a very bad result, compared to the fact that the country was virtually on lockdown, total lockdown, almost. And having said that, we have also seen, surprisingly, that some sectors have done relatively well, like has been mentioned, the ICT, the financial sector, and to some extent the crop production or crop sector of agriculture. Now, having said this, we have also witnessed the fact that ours was not as terrible as some other countries, so we have to thank God for that. Though, as at 2019, on the basis of GDP, we were like number 27 in the world, but by the second quarter, we were like number 30-something. Even then, it is still not a bad performance. Now, looking up to the next quarter, the economic sustainability plan drawn up by government, trying to cushion the effect of this reality of COVID-19, had envisaged, looking at various scenarios, what could be the end result of the GDP growth or otherwise at the end of the year, depending, of course, like I said, on various scenarios, depending on how much intervention comes in and at what level. It's a robust plan, in my opinion, and I think, by and large, given the fact that locally, so many sectors, there are improvements. Like, for example, in the oil sector, the prices have moved up reasonably. So our fears are largely allayed. Then there is also the fact that the opening of most significant sectors and the interventions, the monetary aspect has started, the fiscal aspect have started. Last week or so, I saw something about an intervention for the transport sector, trying to to support them, you know. So I think if we implement the economic sustainability plan as envisaged, perhaps we'll end the year, you know, with very limited, in fact, maybe very small positive margin, you know, not even negative as was envisaged or projected, 0.4% or thereabout. So I'm positive that we are on the way, and that maybe, God willing, our economy will be more resilient and will do better in the next quarter.
All right, thank you. Nii, we're back to Abuja here, where we have Nii. I can see you. Nii, the initial projection, you know, was that it will hit over 7% contraction, and that did not happen, right? So, what did we do right? You've listened to other guests, you know, and their own, you know, contributions to their initial contributions as to the number that came out from the National Bureau of Statistics.
Yeah, it's obvious. It established the fact that we've not done so bad. You know, in fact, I want to say we've not done bad at all, because when you are reviewing these particular figures, you have to review it out of the context of all things being equal, as economists would say. It's not ceteris paribus here, because things are not equal. The pandemic came on us suddenly, and of course the implication was that we had to lock down the economy. So there was no way we could expect any form of growth, you know, in the real sense of it, when an economy is locked down. So in terms of transaction values, in terms of transaction thresholds and all that, this is expected. In fact, I remember at the time we discussed here that it's most likely, you know, given the insanity of the rat race between Russia and Saudi Arabia at that time that affected crude oil prices, that it's likely salaries will not be paid, you know, because of expected decline in FAC allocations. Now, 2 months after, you know, that is after the peak of their crisis, because I tried to locate April, May, June as the epicenter of the crisis, of the pandemic crisis. I think so far so good. We're supposed, our own MBS projected 7.24%. Yes, some other analysts projected something under, but the truth of the matter is the core of our economy was more or less impacted negatively, and we're talking of oil and gas and even agriculture. Because of social distancing, farmers were not going to farms, you know, and where they even farmed, to move from farm gate to city gate became also difficult. Transportation was locked down, you know, more or less. So the expectation was that I expected something, you know, worse than what we have now. That's the truth. But I think what saved the situation must have been the policy deployments, you know, before the epicenter itself, before April. Don't forget that it was in March that the president, you know, inaugurated the Social Sustainability Committee. And before then, I had always followed this loan-to-deposit ratio, because in fact that is the first stimulant, you know, to the economy, as triggered by the Central Bank of Nigeria. Between September and May, 3 trillion new credits, you know, was created in the economy. It means that we had liquidity in the economy. Now, you also had the Anchor Borrowers program before then. Perhaps if we had not had an Anchor Borrowers program, would have also been in a big crisis, you know, in the agricultural sector. Now, seeing the financial sector also returning 18.5%, impressive. Now, but that what tells us is that the 2.3 trillion economic stimulus plan had also been triggered, because it is as a result of the on-lending, you know, from the CBN to the banks, you know, that also helped the bank, you know, put money into the economy. I think as our last count, 2 weeks ago, about 383 billion naira, you know, had been pumped into the economy between April, you know, and July, you know. That would also helped assuage, the tightness in the economy. Then, impressively, our FAC allocation did not disappoint. Between April and July, between April and June, the lowest FAC collection was 547 billion, which was not bad. Then after that, you now had 625 in June, and I think even July collection in August was 676 billion. Now, what that tells you is that our fiscal collection is also growing, to the extent that I think, was it June or July collection? No, that same second quarter collection beat the projected target at 1.27 trillion to 1.29 trillion. First time in 5 years, coming during the epicenter of a pandemic, when you had economic lockdown. So what I'm trying to say essentially is that why we have this reduced, because I want to say is reduced impact, because a number of policies have been deployed, to manage the situation. But and I am optimistic, because if you had your worst case issue between April and June, I have this kind of result, when you had something near like a force majeure, now the economy is being opened up. Even the price of crude oil is increasing. Production threshold is also increasing. So I think going forward, we may not get into positive territory, but we will start, reducing that threshold in the negative territory.
All right, Nee, thank you very much. Let's bring in one more time Professor Ken Ife. Prof, you started out by saying that your key interest has to do with the sectoral numbers, and therefore the performance of the various sectors. Some, you said, were decimated, but you also indicated that the digital economy would appear now to be ready and set, as it were, to take a lead in driving economic growth. You want to expatiate on these points?
Yeah. Now, the digital economy, the ICT, has moved from 10% of the GDP to 14% of the GDP, which is very significant. It's always been around 9-10 for years, but it's now had a quantum jump of 50%. And at the same time, the growth rate came in at 15%, which is only comparable to the banking sector. In fact, it brings me, we need to commend the CBN for what is done on the monetary policy. Because for a start, it granted regulatory forbearance to the commercial banks so that they can restructure the loans and then prevent what we know as a health crisis turning into a financial crisis. And then inject. You could even see that about 2 trillion that was taken. There's injection, and even 50 billion went out straight away to household and micros. There was very, very active, the monetary policy response, very robust. And that's why you even see the sector posting growth when it should have been the other way around. So returning to the ICT, so what this lesson means for us today is when you compare Nigerian economy with our peer economies like South Africa, Brazil, and all of that, and also the Western economies, the decisive difference is the influence of technology on all factors of production. We have been lagging behind, and I have taken this matter into our national development planning framework to isolate, to remove innovation and make it a central national program, and then ensure that it will link to all others and influence all other factors of production. So this has given us the impetus. We need to do that so that we can create the growth and the momentum that we need. You see the transportation sector, the damage is minus 47%. But the worst hit is the aviation sector, which is minus 57%. The nature of the intervention you require in sectors are different. Because if you say in aviation, I'll give you all the measures that you need to take there. Manufacturing came at about minus 8. But when you look at which manufacturing, you see what's news. So they're all very different. The composition are also very, very different. And then you know that the lockdown hit the accommodation and the food preparation sector, and that's why you saw them coming down to -30. Obviously, if the supply of the food is still an issue, there's an issue there. I don't know how quickly they will recover. But you see countries like UK and America being proactive in supporting the food sector and saying, it's to help out. In other words, Monday to Wednesday, they sell food at half the price, restaurants, and they're recovering. And you've seen that happen. So we have to order a sector level of targeting to be able to deal with lifting them out of the problem that they have.
I just wonder, Kieran, the point that Prof just raised about the hospitality sector and what NTA himself was also saying earlier, you still go around, the hospitality sector is still on partial lockdown. Essentially, I doubt if they have their full occupancy rates, the services that are ancillary or even fundamental to their operations are still virtually either on lockdown or actual lockdown. Bars and restaurants and all of that. And this is, of course, coming in this third quarter. So
part of it is aviation, because much of the aviation and travel connects to accommodation. And and when that hasn't recovered, it hasn't even started. It only started domestic.
All right, thank you. Let's return to Professor O'Baden. I'd like you to also take a look at this, the sector in Benin, the sectoral aspect of this, the interventions that the federal government put in place to cushion the effect of the pandemic with respect to the GDP that we're talking about. And the latest statistics shows that Nigeria's biggest revenue earner, the oil sector, nosedived with about 6.63% contraction in the second quarter of 2020. Put that in context, in your answer.
Thank you very much, Kieran. The oil sector dipped, and again, it's understandable, given the challenges relating to demand for crude oil, which had become weak, excess supply in the world market, which had adversely affected, prices of crude oil, and also affected the production of crude oil in Nigeria, production and export. If you look at the data very strongly, you will observe that the average daily production of crude oil in Nigeria reduced from about 2.0 million barrels per 0.7 million barrels per day to about 1.8 million barrels per day. And that's because of the challenges in the world market, not necessarily arising from challenges in the Niger Delta region now. It's problem of demand and supply. So that aspect is very understandable. But having said that, let me say that the pattern of growth which has come out in the various sectors reflects the nature of the pandemic, the sectors that were allowed to operate, and the sectors for which policies were activated. For example, you will observe that from my reckoning, a total of 36 subsectors of the economy recorded negative growth during the second quarter. And those sectors are spread across the various sectors of industry, mining and quarrying, and services. Only agriculture is spared there. And if you look again at the sectors that experienced positive growth, they are largely the sectors that were not too affected, by the pandemic. Agricultural activities were still permitted. Financial services activities were permitted. And of course, the health sector activities they were also permitted and encouraged. And so you find that you had financial sector, recording positive growth through financial institutions. The human health and social services sectors also recording positive growth, among others. So you then find a situation that the lockdown, logically, can be used to explain the pattern of growth that we have had, in the various sectors of the economy. The pharmaceutical product sector was, recorded positive growth because of the encouragement, the spending, and in particular, the monetary interventions, by the Central Bank of Nigeria and the organized private sector, as well as government itself. So the sectoral growth pattern reflects the situation whereby if we gradually lifted, the lockdown in different sectors of the economy, you will have a rebound of growth. I think that's where, you also observe that the growth, the aggregate average growth that was realized, minus 6.1%, also reflected the situation whereby in states where the lockdown was supposed to be total, the lockdown actually turned out to be partial, not really well complied with, because of the challenges of the various governments, in keeping, daily paid workers at home, artisans, market women, and all that. So there were still activities going on in some sectors, even though they were supposed to be locked down. So generally, Kieran, we will say that it is very likely the case that now that the lockdown is gradually being eased, by the day, we are likely to see, greater responses of the various sectors, of the economy. Now, if trade, is permitted both within and outside the country, then definitely that is likely to boost the growth of the economy. So it's very much the case that the industrial sector, the services sector, and the mining and quarrying subsectors, which had experienced very serious, negative contraction, would rebound, given the fact that economic activities are gradually being, unlocked again.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Michael Badan. Let's return to Kano. Dr. Yushau Ango, Kano Network Center. Now, well, we've talked about numbers in aggregate terms. We've also talked about it on the national level. Can we reduce this to the corporate and individual level and see how perhaps a man on the street, literally, can understand what is playing out in terms of the contraction of the GDP? I mean, somebody will tell you that, things are getting a bit tough or even tougher. So what does this mean to the individual or corporate pockets in the first instance, and how might it impact on the efforts to tackle poverty in the country?
Okay, thank you. Before then, I want to mention, or rather comment on something that I think we got right, which is obviously why the financial sector has done well, in my opinion, and the ICT sector have done well, in my opinion, is because, like Prof said, the economy, we are becoming more digitally inclined. Maybe what happened in the financial sector is that people were able to use the services that were available in banks to take advantage, to do their transactions. Probably that must have contributed to whatever happened in that sector. Now, coming to your question, the ordinary man on the street actually was hugely affected. Most people, like Prof said, especially those who are artisans, who are on daily paid basis, were forced to stay at home. So they will feel the pinch directly of what was happening in the economy because there was no money to get. Some small traders and others who are employed, let's say by transport operators, had no income again. And so you have to now dip into your savings. And basically, you wake up and you realize that much of your savings, there is no more savings. This is another indication of what happened. Now, quite a number of organizations could not pay their workers. Take example, the case of private school teachers. They have suffered substantially because basically there were no schools. And even later on when the question of e-learning or trying to teach virtually came into force, many of them have not been paid. And that is, those people will feel it, the school operators will feel it, SMEs will feel it. That is why government is coming up with a lot of initiatives, trying to bail out some of these sectors. So every manufacturing, every corporate company and every Nigerian actually have felt what happened because staying at home for that length of time was a serious one. Only certain sectors were allowed, like for example, transportation was allowed, especially for food. Those who are haulage, moving food, stuff and all that, they were allowed. But virtually most Nigerians felt the pinch. Luckily for us, was stated earlier, the states were getting their allocations, the local governments were getting their allocations, so there wasn't much problem of, laying up workers, which we all feared will happen. But I can say that every Nigerian felt the pinch. And so Nigerians, now that we are relaxing, are realizing what it means. And when they see the results of the third quarter, I'm sure Nigerians will know that what they do and what they contribute to the economy matters. And how they feel or whatever happens, these are not just figures. This is reality, that they will see an improvement, God willing.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Let's return here to Nee. Let's talk about the third quarter, which will soon be over. What is your projection, given the seemingly stability in the oil market, which is a major influencer?
Yeah, it's not stable yet, especially when you look at if we are using the January-March price, as the baseline, the truth is that even that quarter we had already declining prices, and now we've been floating on a treasury between 40 and 45. We still have quantity sanction, for August and September. And that may take us below 1.81 that we are even doing now, because of OPEC claim that we breached our quota, for May and June. So we have to pay it up going forward. So it's not as stable. The price is not the $42, $45 per barrel range. Is still not our required pricing level. The minimum we can do, that we should expect that can stabilize us maybe in the region of 65, 70 in the real sense of it. So we are still more or less in that crisis trajectory, as it were. The only comfort is that the impact would reduce, because of more economic activities that are now enabled because the economy is opening up. I want to also use the opportunity to commend the President and the Presidential Task Force on the pandemic. We can establish a relationship between what they did or what they are doing and, of course, the impact on the economy. Because you saw deliberate thoughts and policy positions and decisions, on that eventually led to what, the result we are looking at. If we are saying we have an impressive result relative to what we are expecting, it's because we have a body in place that was also evaluating what needed to be done and at the appropriate time determined how it should be done. So I think that relationship, impacted the result. For me, going forward, I expect that the numbers will fall, but will still be in the negative, territory. I recall first quarter 2004, 7.6, much higher than this, and we still did strong on the 12 months aggregate. So it's likely we are not going to do that, because price that time, the 2004, it was the price of crude oil, that helped us get into the positive territory strongly. Now it's not likely price of crude oil will do much. I don't expect price of crude oil to even spiral up to $50, even up to December. So I expect that we'll do more activities. The international flights are now allowed. International travels are allowed. It had impacted even the announcement by CBN that it will start selling dollars to foreign exchange to bureau de change had impacted rates at the parallel markets and the high and E markets too. But we have issues with employment. We have issues with inflation. It's likely we'll still continue to battle with inflation rates. It's likely we'll still continue to battle with employment, and underemployment. And these are the reflections of the consequences of the pandemic in the real sense of it. So we have seen increase in unemployment rates, increase in under-unemployment, increase in inflation rate. These are the major things that are impacting the life of the average individual out there. Well, policy positions too, I am hopeful. We are talking already, we are reading about 600 billion naira targeted at 2.5 million farmers. I think if that one is quickly done, and I hope the CBN, I am actually pleading that the CBN should embark on more public enlightenment on this 2.3 trillion stimulus plan, especially the 1.1 trillion targeted at the health and the manufacturing sector, so that more Nigerians can be more aware of it and see how they can also latch onto this.
All right, Neil Akinsejo, thank you very much. Professor Ken Ife, assuming one adopted the worst case scenario with regard to the third quarter, which of course comes to an end in a matter of weeks, because if you look at the trend, businesses are still not fully open in major cities, in major economic centers, whether in Lagos, in Kano, and elsewhere. Businesses, of course, still remain largely sluggish. So if we adopted the worst-case scenario in terms of projections of the performance of the GDP, what will this mean in real terms, on the one hand, and how should we prepare for those outcomes?
I tell you what worries me about not seeing light in the end of the tunnel is that whilst the government, both on the fiscal and monetary sides, have actually done well in provisioning. We see in the side of CBN 3.5 trillion on the table. We see on the side of the economic sustainability 2.3 trillion. But when you begin to look at the delivery on the fiscal side, you start wondering. For example, we see what happened to construction. Construction, this time last year, construction posted 42% growth, and now is minus 30. So they had the biggest shock of minus 70%. And then you've seen government's program to employ 774,000 people in the local, down to the local government. 6 months, we haven't seen any traction on that. All we are having is conflict between the National Assembly and the... I mean, it gets very disappointing. You say, what else? Is Buhari going to go leave and go and do this for them? You just worry. Then also, we have been discussing on our discussion so far has been on output side of the GDP. But when you look at the consumption side of the GDP, household consumption is 84%. Government is 5.7%. So how are we impacting the demand side? Because you can create the products, but how do you stimulate demand? Yeah. Which comes to the employment that you mentioned. So we need to get these monies out to the people. CBN gave 50 billion immediately. There were some delays, but as soon as they focus on BVN, which is technology, biometric technology, the money went. We need more, but targeted at sectors that have collapsed completely. And so we need to bring it all together and see how we will make sure that we will lead the economy out of the recession. Of course, we're also planning for the future, taking the lessons that we are learning, which sectors are important for us, plan going ahead. And I did mention digital technology now. We have bioeconomy, we have digital economy, we have science and technology and innovation. We are getting them now to the center stage where they take, the issue is, yes, that's the national framework for this. Then how does it get down to all the MDAs and all the sectors? And then how does state work with federal government, particularly in the area of agriculture, in the area of easing doing business, and then also in the area of health and now, see, look, in the discussion we had in March at the CBN headquarters office, the private sector came out and said, we're going to float 115 trillion infrastructure company and take the burden of infrastructure away from the government. Those 26 key infrastructure projects, so that government can focus on health, education, and how to work with states on agriculture. And that is the way to go. And the government was going to bring about $2 billion sovereign guarantee to make that take off. That is very critical. It's very, very critical, because if you don't have traction on that, then the debt overhang and this debt service, which is over 50% now, it will remove the money and flexibility that the government has to respond to the interventions. So we have to make sure we get that moving straight away than wait and have more difficulty in having liquidity to deal with the problems.
Yeah, well, I just want to say, part of my question, Prof, is everywhere you turn, except, of course, for the ICT and a couple of other sectors that posted positive growth, everybody is complaining, including those who are money bags in the private sector. The uncertainty means that everyone is saying, look, this is not the time to spend. Hold. So how then do you kick off with this very laudable idea that you guys you discussed at the CBN to say, look, we're going to have the private sector intervene with their funds in 26 major projects or otherwise, so that government can then use its funds for other purposes? Everybody's going to say, look, we've all taken a beating, so let's watch and see.
Well, the thing is, the main target for that infrastructure company is this. If we can get the comfort of a $2 trillion guarantee from government, which is nothing, for $2 billion guarantee from government, that is a small money, but it means a lot to sovereign investors. Now, sovereign investors are going to be interested because they know that and also we're doing work on the national savings scheme, a new national savings scheme, to ensure that we mop up liquidity because there's more money out in the informal sector. So that also will make more, and don't forget, this is all in Naira, not in the 15 trillion is in Naira. So we are thinking about raising money in Naira to continue this work rather than resorting to more external borrowing. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. So the thing is, the rates that will be offered will be better than what we are dealing with at the moment. But the confidence factor is what plays in the minds of investors. Investors are going to say, well, look at this infrastructure company, robust management structure, heavily funded and supported by sovereign investment. We can see that they are going to take 26 projects from the government, not just take it and start working on. No, they will have to subject them to due diligence and make sure that those ones that are viable and sustainable, they will run with them. They're now in a better position to do sustainable PPP contracts. Government, this is private to private. You give you a contract on a PPP, you know that it's going to work. Not somebody comes and twists the arm of government and then you end up in court. No, you're not going to have that with the private sector.
Right. No, that's very interesting, Prof.
It's very much on ground.
Yeah, it's
with the African Finance Corporation, being the bedrock of it. I think it's a very laudable projection. I want to say it as a projection, and it has been approved by the FEC, and I think it was approved by the FEC 2 weeks ago. So to that extent, I think it's all up and running.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's bring in Professor Badan here. I'd like you to speak to the issue that Prof has just raised now, because going forward, it's very pertinent, that we devise other means, to see how we can improve the GDP of the country, especially in the area of the manufacturing sector, which of course has performed below expectation. As a matter of fact, that sector has not really played the kind of role expected of it, because it's supposed to be the engine room of production in Nigeria.
Thank you very much, Kirian. Before zeroing in on the manufacturing sector, let me also briefly add that growth in the third quarter remains challenging. There are still a number of headwinds that must be borne in mind, and we try to overcome to improve growth outcomes in the third quarter, and perhaps reduce the depth of the contraction, and perhaps, if we're lucky, move into the positive growth trajectory, perhaps below 1% and so on. Those headwinds, government must continue to take cognizance of them. Number one, Niyi Akinsuju had already emphasized it, the issue of low oil price. That one will continue to be a reality. And number two, the issue of lack of fiscal space or fiscal buffers for government. Much revenue is still not available, as it were, by way of foreign exchange or naira revenue to implement the very laudable programs that have been outlined to stimulate the economy. There is foreign, exchange pressure, which had resulted in, high exchange rate, particularly in the parallel market and BDC. And importantly, the state level of external reserves is still not comfortable. That's the major reason why the central bank had been quite cautious, in opening up, access, to foreign exchange officially to BDCs. But now it's going to be opened up. That will put a little more pressure again. And then the issue of aggregate demand. If goods are produced, they must be bought. And at the moment, consumption, household consumer demand is still relatively weak, and much more weakened now by the fact of economic contraction, which is, heightened unemployment and heightened poverty. So you find a situation whereby even where the producing sectors want to produce and supply is up, but that in itself, may not be bought because of weak consumer demand. I think that's where the central bank would continue to, use moral suasion to appeal to the deposit money banks to, increase, they expand consumer, loans to enable people to buy goods and services. And of course, in this area of improving consumer demand, government also has a responsibility there by implementing that aspect of the economic sustainability plan, which provides for, assistance to vulnerable small and medium enterprises by way of payroll support. I think, somebody mentioned it earlier, the issue of, private, educational institutions, which have for 5 months not earned any income. And the workers there have not been paid. So purchasing power for them is not there. And so if government can implement, that aspect of supporting, enterprises to maintain payroll and keep the level of employment or recall sacked workers, that one can help demand. That leads me to the manufacturing sector. Manufacturing investment is not happening as expected. I think that was pointed out by Professor Ike. Still uncertainty among manufacturers, because if they have to invest and produce goods and services, the goods must be bought. Otherwise, it will be wasted investment. So, for the manufacturing sector, the central bank has, 1.1, trillion naira, provided in the economic sustainability plan for them. I think, if implementation has not started, earnestly, it should start and then vigorously to, reactivate activities in the manufacturing, sector. And the legacy factors or anyway challenges of the manufacturing sector are still there. The infrastructure constraint, has not been lessened that much. The issue of high interest rates, high cost of finance by the major manufacturing sectors is still not sorted out, except if they decide to borrow through the central bank facility, which allows them to get interest rates, loans at less than 10%, 9%. I think the commercial banks has that access to that, but some of them are not willing to buy into it. So issue of high cost of funds for them, legacy infrastructure, and of course, issue of taxes, multiple taxes. Taxes are still being charged indiscriminately. This is not the time for raising revenue through taxation of production enterprises when the objective is to encourage them, to produce and lift the economy out of, the current state where it is. So, for the manufacturing sector, I think there is need to build confidence. There is need for reassurance to operators in that sector through, friendly public policies. And of course, the manufacturers themselves will also have to do a number of things to actually appreciate the fact that extraordinary actions and interventions are also required on their part, and of course, patriotism to be able to lift the economy out of the present state, minimize the contraction in the third quarter, and possibly move into positive growth trajectory.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Mike Abadan. We are going to have to take a short break now, gentlemen. When we return, we'll continue with the conversation and also take the tweets that have come in from our viewers.
A new edition of TV Guide is out, featuring great personalities from all walks of life. Expository interview with a young TV presenter who shows passion on what she does, Morayo Afolabi Brown of TVC. Pick a copy of this compendium of mind-blowing stories and get abreast with issues as regards media convergence, leadership, health, star profiles, star programs, fashion, sports, human angle stories, and lots more. Meet some media professionals within our space who have paid their dues in no small ways. TV Guide, very incisive, very educative and compelling. Grab a copy at the vendor near you or NTA stations nationwide. TV Guide, your indispensable companion.
Sensitivity is a short, sharp pain that people experience when they have something hot or cold getting to the nerve of the tooth. If the sensitivity is left alone, it may get worse. Dentists recommend Sensodyne. It's able to calm the nerve of the tooth. The proof's in the results. It works. Sensitivity is a short, sharp pain that people experience when they have something hot or cold getting to the nerve of the tooth. If the sensitivity is left alone, it may get worse. Dentists recommend Sensodyne. It's able to calm the nerve of the tooth. The proof's in the results. It works.
as a strong immune system increases the chances of victims surviving COVID-19. A corruption-free society creates opportunities for citizens to thrive and prosper. Build your immunity. Stop corruption now. Report all acts of corruption to ICPC on this toll-free number 0800 22 55 4272. This message is brought to you by ICPC and NTA.
You're welcome back, and the program is still Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA, and we are discussing the second quarter of the nation's GDP. And at this point, we'd like to also share what the viewers are contributing to the program this morning by way of tweets. And first, we have a PO Banji here. He says mechanized farming and industrialization is key, especially at the state level. Productivity in the area of competitive advantage leads to relevance. Relying on other nations for goods is a killer. It is self-enslaving and humiliating economically.
Festus Akimboyawa tweet says the plunge in Nigeria's second quarter GDP was due to COVID-19 induced lockdowns. We should expect a sharp rebound in the third quarter with factories, shops, hotels, restaurants, schools, and international flights reopening. We must do our best to avoid a second wave of COVID-19. So what's the guarantee? We've done 2 months already in the third quarter. You say you expect a sharp rebound? I think the experts don't quite share that optimism.
Yeah, Omen says our economy will bounce back quickly if we work for our collective gain. Sincerely empower the right people and sectors that are the engine room of economic growth.
Now, Metadoka, that's the Twitter handle. Let's keep our money in our economy by promoting indigenous technology, create real empowerment programs, and not for political propaganda.
Okay, Uba Abdul Hamid, I hope I'm right there, he said, let's maintain our status quo and keep on patronizing our home goods. In the short run, federal government should stop external borrowing, stop saving foreign reserve, invest in infrastructure, and subsidize prices to create higher real income, sustain security in the Northwest, and sufficient agricultural productivity.
Mike Anyakwa says second quarter GDP undoubtedly was greatly affected by the pandemic. Low earnings by governments, decline productivity, inflation, rise in unemployment, weak local currency, etc. But the economy can be reflected by some deliberate policies.
Yunus Idris, the economy will bounce back quickly when government keeps concentrating on the solid minerals sector, paying contractors on time, and granting waiver to some importers and tax reliefs to some manufacturers.
Chris Simeon, COVID-19 has influenced our second quarter GDP negatively. In this kind of scenario, government should come out with policies that would help rejuvenate the economy.
Steve Bond 07, agriculture practice on safe farm is the solution. It's funny to learn that the country had to borrow rice from ECOWAS. I'm not sure we borrowed rice from ECOWAS.
Nigeria borrowed rice from ECOWAS.
Steve, I'm not sure you got your information right.
We borrowed rice.
How can Nigeria borrow rice from ECOWAS when we are saying that there's a relatively, in fact, there's an increase, a substantial increase
in domestic cultivation
of rice and rice production generally. So please, we didn't borrow rice from ECOWAS, please.
All right, Nandambu, it says reopening the economy will require widespread testing, contact tracing, and doing so responsibly, even on our part as individuals, which is the only way to avoid panic and further contamination.
Jack Solomon, the national economy will overcome the adverse impact of the coronavirus epidemic gradually if the government and NGOs demonstrate a diversification momentum for restorative growth and gradual recovery. Economy will only improve when government at all levels create an enabling environment for investors to thrive, provide infrastructure, and bring the virus spread under control.
Eno Ayok Edwin, government at all levels should create more jobs and help promote investment at local government levels to reduce urban migration and, most importantly, improve and sustain the health and agricultural sectors.
Akejo Labaju, the report on quarter 2 is bad, but could be worse in quarter 3 unless we all work together to remove wastage and leakage. We have suddenly lost the sense of negotiating for best practice, for best price in many of our contractual arrangements to get the best value for every naira spent. But you're not specific, about where we lost the sense of negotiating for best practice. That would have made it clearer for us to understand where you're coming from. But you have made the point that there's no sense of negotiating for best practice for the best price.
Okay, Kirian. Leo Fadaka, Nigeria has the population and market for locally produced goods and services. Concentrate on agriculture for food security, invest in the entertainment industry, in social services, ICT, and Nigeria's economy will bounce back.
Banu Kantu, the second quarter GDP witnessed decline in vibrant economic activities, and for it to bounce back, the efforts that lowered the GDP must be investigated, analyzed, and addressed accordingly.
And then you have this from Johnson Inye. It says the economy can bounce back with employment. For example, the government can consider the professionals in the Empower program, that is those who taught and with qualifications in education or registered with the Teachers Registration Council of Nigeria instead of exiting such professionals. So those are the twists that we have in the meantime. Let's return to our Kano Network Center, Dr. Yushau Ango. Dr. Yushau Ango, I mean, what we've been talking about would appear to concern, obviously, the general control of the economy and the role of the federal government in all of this. It's more like dealing with the headwaters. But again, we often refer to subnational entities in all of this. And one of the issues that came out of the NBS report has been the disputation of the unemployment figures attributed to some of the states. Some states will say, no, this is not, we can't have so many unemployed persons in our state. We don't have this, we don't have that. But in seeking to ensure that the coronavirus health crisis doesn't translate into a more grievous financial or economic crisis, what would you like to see the subnational entities do more in addition to what we're already seeing from agencies of the federal government?
Well, the first thing they need to do is to key into the various initiatives, especially of the Economic Sustainability Plan, which is the plan that is trying to ensure that we don't we come out of this crisis. Like you said, we have a health crisis so that we will not have an economic crisis. I would like to see the state governments, keen in many respects. The agricultural intervention, 638 billion or thereabout. The people that will benefit are farmers who are based in the states. They need to enlighten them. They need to show them how they will get advantage of that. They need to provide the farmlands that are required because they control the farmlands. They control the lands. They need also key into another aspect, which is the housing sector. We're expecting over 300,000 houses to be built, which will again become a source of a lot of activity, especially on the construction side, and will affect employment at the levels of local governments, where we expect 400 houses per local government. We expect them to key in strongly, by providing the lands, encouraging their people to partake. Every local government will be affected, but imagine that kind of level of activity happening at every local government. I think the states need to key in. They need to also, just like federal government did in some respects, where they gave out some, they relaxed some charges, especially like NAFDAC and other charges. They need to also reduce charges, especially for sectors that were badly affected. The transport sector, for example, I'm talking about land transportation, the hotels and the restaurants and the like, the private schools, which I mentioned earlier. If there are any taxes to them, the states need to relax those taxes for now. What we need now is for the economy to work, for activities to be happening so that we can come out of this. We don't need to go into recession, We have not gone into recession yet, so we shouldn't allow ourselves to go into recession. So the subnationals have a lot of things to do themselves. They should not lay off their workers. We thank God they are able to get the federal allocations even higher than we expected. So these are the kind of things I think the subnational states and local governments need to do.
Okay, gentlemen, as we are just gradually rounding off this program, may I just take us back, to what Professor Baden, did mention when he was trying to define, the GDP, where he said that, look, that the GDP is the market value of all final goods and services produced within a country and in a given period of time, and it's also used to measure general economic growth of a nation. Now, let me ask Lee this. With the percentage that we have presently, 6.1, does this raise concern about the economic outlook of this country between now and the end of the year?
As I observed, it's this figure is it's not as a result of the conventional measurement, of economic indicators, because what we had in that particular quarter was more or less a force majeure, where you could not control the circumstances, as it were. So I don't want to use this figure. I would rather be hopeful, for an economic environment where all segments of the economy are active. If they are active, then we can now, of course, assume the position of ceteris paribus. Then you can now, that practically these are the factors that had led to either the decline, the contraction, or the rebound, as it were. But going forward, the third quarter will still be low, will be slow. It may not be up to 6.1, because, of course, the factors that led to this are being more or less mediated. The price of crude oil is on the increase. The quantity is also on the increase. Sectors in the economy are opening up. In fact, schools are being given consideration. Lagos State had ordered opening for tertiary institutions in September. So many others. But of course, we are not yet in buoyancy. Hospitalities are still, the hospitality sector is still more or less in redundancy, until you have effectively international flights coming in and going out, you cannot have the hospitality industries, booming. You still have transportation, it will have effect. And don't forget that price of petroleum, PMS, is also on the increase. That would also have a way of impacting inflation going forward. So I think generally the third quarter may not be too impressive. It will be slow, Again, because as a result of the fallout, and part of the relics of the pandemic. Fourth quarter, we are hopeful that most segments or sectors of the economy would have opened up by then. But what we now have will be effective demand. We'll have challenges, with demands, the demand push aspect of the economy. Of course, because we have now recorded higher numbers of unemployed people, about 39 million in terms of figures, are unemployed now. And another 35 million or thereabout are underemployed. So we have people that don't have income that they can actually spend, and that is important. Even if manufacturers and farmers are producing, the buyers are not available, to buy to maximum. So those some of those things will still impact the economy. But again, the measures being put in place. And as somebody noted, my concern is that there's a need for continued engagement with Nigerians, on these policies, so that as good as they are, Nigerians must be, we must touch base with Nigerians to have, details of this and to know exactly where to go to and how to go about it. It's very important.
All right, Neil, thank you very much. Professor Kenife, we're pressed for time. As always, you gentlemen have expressed your thoughts and perspectives. So let's have your closing thoughts. I want to return you to the points articulated by Yushua Ango with regard to the role of the subnational entities. He says, let them key into policies being formulated and presented, of course, by federal government agencies. The state governments were also part of the economic sustainability plan. And he also recommends that this is not a time to be slapping rates and levies and taxes on businesses if you want them to rebound. What are your closing thoughts, very briefly?
Well, I don't see that we are going to recover before December, fourth quarter. Because the oil is selling at we are producing at 1.3 as against a projection of 1.87 million per barrel. So that part is going to be missing. Then on the question of how we improve aggregate demand, because you can have output rise today, and then in three months' time, if there's no increase in aggregate demand, then you're going to get a fall. Because you can't produce, and then nobody buys it, and then you go and produce more. Where are you going to get the money?
It's going to take off the inventory.
Because nobody has taken up. Now, in the context of state in fact, I'm talking to Central Bank now on a model of anchor borrowers program that brings the states right to the center of this program for sustainability. Because we're doing very well with various value chain actors like farmers associations, this association, all that. But if you don't consolidate that at state level, at subnational level, then it's going to be like that. Do you understand? So I'm talking to them on some model that can be floated across the states to ensure that they carry that burden off CBN. The funding will still be there, but CBN will not be very, very active in the terms of the delivery of that.
Okay. All right, so we just hope that the subnationals will key into that because from historically, most of the policies of federal government are not really keyed into by subnationals. But because we're talking about economy this time around, I'm sure that subnationals will, find a reason or will have a reason to key into the federal government policy towards the recovery of the nation's economy. At this point, we would like to appreciate all of you for being here this morning. Professor Kenife, we thank you for coming, Professor of Economics. And Nii Akinseju, Investment and Financial Expert, is also a pleasure talking to you this morning. From my Benin Network Center, we spoke with Professor Michael Badan. We also appreciate you being part of our program this morning, and of course, the insights that you brought into the conversation. Thank you indeed. From Kano, we had Dr. Yushua Ango, Associate Professor of Business Entrepreneurship and Dean Postgraduate School, Kaduna State University. We also want to thank you for being part of our show this morning. It's been a pleasure hearing from you on this platform.
All right, and that does it for us on Good Morning Nigeria. We thank you for being around. We are back again tomorrow, same time, 7 in the morning. Stay safe and be well. I'm Kingsley Osadolo.
And I'm Kirin Umayo. You have a great week ahead. And remember to wear your face mask, observe physical distancing, and stay safe as well.